Rents in New York City are absolutely skyrocketing. The landlords are now charging as much as $5,000 a month for a one-bedroom apartment, and this is creating a massive rental crisis in New York City where people are getting priced out and forced to leave. And this rent has gone up by more than 25% from pre-pandemic norms. Now, the place where we need to start is the pandemic and COVID. We need to wind back the clock 5 years because that was a bad time for New York City. Lots of people left New York City. In 1 year, over 100,000 people fled Manhattan, 5 times the biggest annual loss that had ever been experienced. And actually, when that happened in 2020 and 2021, rents in Manhattan actually dropped precipitously. You can see a lot of Zillow listings had 10, 20, 30% rent cuts, and it was actually a deal to rent an apartment in New York City in 2021 and 2022. But as you can see, that is no longer the case. People are back in New York City in full force, especially with big businesses like JP Morgan calling their workers back into the office. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, has been very outspoken about how he wants his workers back in the office 5 days a week, and the landlords, they're taking full advantage of this. They know that there's a shortage of apartments, and they're jacking up the rents. The rental vacancy rate right now in Manhattan is 1.4%. And so there was a lot of people who thought Manhattan was going to be over after the pandemic. They thought that that was the death knell, that remote work would mean that New York City was never going to recover. But clearly, that's not the case anymore. Right now, a studio apartment in Manhattan costs around $3,200 a month. A one-bedroom costs $3,900 a month, and a two-bedroom costs over $5,000 a month. It's amazing that people can even afford to live here in New York. I was just reading data about how the average New Yorker needs to earn twice the median income in order to stay below the 30% rental to income threshold. And when you look at data on ReventureApp, you could see that most people who rent in New York are having to spend almost half of their gross income on their rent. Now, as some of you know, I'm originally from New York. I'm not from New York City. I was raised just outside of New York City in Westchester County, and then moved upstate towards the Albany area when I was a teenager. And I used to come into the city all the time when I was a kid. My parents would bring me in here. My mom would do trade shows at the Javits Center. And so I've been in the city hundreds and hundreds of times. And coming back here feels really, really good. I could see why a lot of people are moving back to Manhattan. This is a city where there's no competitor in terms of how vibrant it is, in terms of the opportunities, in terms of how you could do anything at any time. And just, going for a random walk, you stumble into world famous things like Madison Square Garden. Right behind me, this is where the New York Rangers play, the New York Knicks play, where Billy Joel does all his concerts. Trump actually had a rally at Madison Square Garden before the election. It's the world's most famous arena. And you just stumble into this type of stuff all the time when you're in New York, and it's especially a nice time of year right now, in April and May, when the weather's good. It's like 70 degrees. But back to the original point of this video, which is landlords and the rental rates in New York City. I mean, it is crazy when you go on Zillow and look at the apartments in New York, how much they cost. Like, if you want a decent studio in New York, you got to pay $3,500 a month. That's just the starting rate to live in Manhattan. If you go out to Brooklyn maybe, or Queens, you can get that studio for $2,000 a month in certain neighborhoods. But that's the starting point for a studio. A one bedroom, you really got to pay at least $4,000, maybe $4,500 a month if you want a decent one bedroom apartment. And then don't get me started on the 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms. There's actually kind of a well-known fact in Manhattan is that the more bedrooms you get in the apartment, the higher the per square foot rent gets. So a 2 bedroom might go for $6,000 and a 3 bedroom might go for $9,000. And that's actually against the conventional wisdom in other markets. Like if you were to go to Florida or Texas, the more bedrooms you add in an apartment, the cheaper the rent gets per square foot. Like if you divide the rent by the square footage in the apartment. But in New York, the more expensive it gets because there's just not that many 2 bedroom and 3 bedroom apartments and condos. And if you do have a family in New York City, that's kind of your only option. For having a family where your kids can have a bedroom is to have a 3 bedroom apartment. But now there's a big influx of new people moving in. In particular, there's a lot of articles talking about how Gen Z is flocking to Manhattan right now. And Manhattan's really popular among people in their early 20s, mid 20s, because it's fun, right? It's also so different than what happened during the pandemic. During the pandemic, all these people got locked down, and especially younger kids, like, they didn't have their college graduation, they didn't get to take their first job and go out and have fun and party with their coworkers. Kind of just a rite of passage, if you graduate from college and move to a big city. That was all closed off for a couple years. So now that those options are back, You know, the younger adults in America, Gen Z, they're taking it, and thus they are flocking to New York City. I also actually don't think the homelessness here is as bad as it was 2 to 3 years ago, because I take frequent trips to New York, and I was here in 2022, late 2022, and it was pretty bad, especially in this area in Midtown, around where Penn Station is and Madison Square Garden. And homelessness in this area was a huge, huge issue 2 to 3 years ago. I'm walking around now in 2025, and it seems significantly better than it was back then. I don't know if that's just because, you know, the pandemic hangover is easing, or maybe the new mayor, Eric Adams, maybe he did some things to help clean it up. I'm not quite sure, but New York City does feel better. It feels safer than it did a couple years ago after the pandemic ended. All right, folks, and if you've never had the pleasure of going to a New York City market or bodega, you need to put it on your list. Basically, like, food in New York is really expensive, but yet you can go into these bodegas, so I'm gonna take you in right now, and you can actually get like an egg sandwich for how much? $3.99, not bad. Now I'm gonna show you another cool thing here in New York City, everyone. And these cool things just stack up spontaneously. I didn't plan this video out at all. I just went for a walk, and we're stumbling into a whole bunch of stuff. This structure here, which you can see behind the trees, all the way up there. Actually, that was a terrible shot. Let me get a better shot. This structure is called The Vessel, and this was opened in 2019. It's in Hudson Yards in New York City, a newer neighborhood. Apparently cost something like $200 million to build. It's a big tourist attraction, and I guess you just walk up it and you take Instagram photos in front of it. It's actually not that many people here right now. Interestingly, you can see Hudson Yards is right on the Hudson River, right next to the big train terminal, where they have a lot of the trains where they originate from on the subway. And then right over there, that glass building is called the Javits Center, and they have a lot of trade shows, a lot of conferences. I used to go there as a kid all the time. And so if you guys haven't taken a trip to New York in a while, you should come, especially in the summer, because it's just an endless amount of things that you can just stumble into that are interesting. Here's yet another thing that I'm stumbling into. Take a look at this apartment tower here. This is a new luxury apartment tower called, I guess, 311, studios to 2 bedrooms. Guess how much the rents are in a luxury apartment building in New York? So I was talking before the rents, like, on average. In these luxury buildings, folks, the rents for a 1-bedroom are as high as $6,000 a month. 2 bedrooms go as high as $9,000 to $10,000 a month. I mean, absolutely unbelievable. You have to ask yourself the question, like, who is renting those apartments? Who is paying $10,000 a month on rent? And then why do they do it? Why do they pay $10,000 a month on rent when you could literally buy like 5 houses in Texas for the same monthly cost? And a big issue is millionaires. There's been a big increase in millionaires moving into Manhattan, and in particular, millionaires renting. A recent study showed that there's been a 150% increase in the number of millionaires who are electing to rent an apartment in Manhattan rather than buy a condo. This increase in millionaires wanting to rent is also causing the rental rates to go up and pricing out many of the locals in Manhattan. An important thing to consider is that the median household income in Manhattan is $102,000. Now that's well above the US average. However, that isn't that high compared to how much the rents are. Let's just do some simple math. Median income is $102 in Manhattan. The typical rent on Reventure app is $42.50 a month. That's $50,000 a year, meaning that the average household in Manhattan is having to spend over 50% of their gross income on rent. And this is just simply a way of life in New York City. You know, people here don't save money. You know, saving money is not really a thing in New York City. Preparing for your financial future is not really a thing in New York City. Rather, people move here so they can, you know, have a good time, have fun, be in the vibrant city atmosphere, and potentially increase their earning potential into the future, because Manhattan is still the place where the best jobs are, the highest paying jobs. And if you want to climb the corporate ladder, or you want to make it in tech or in real estate or in finance, this is still the city to move to. So maybe while people struggle initially in New York City, some of them who are successful down the line can make it big. And this ends up being kind of a boomer bust city. You get a certain percentage of people who just really, really struggle and never make it, and then a certain percentage of people who become really, really wealthy. But overall, one thing I actually wanted to talk about is how I think New York City could be a good place to buy real estate over the next couple years. A lot of you guys know me on this channel as someone who's very bearish on the housing market, telling you not to buy real estate. But interestingly, my data is saying that Manhattan is a good place to buy real estate right now, and that condo values are down about 25% from their long-term norms. Condo values in New York City are 25% undervalued compared to their 2-decade average. Now, some of you might be saying, how is that possible? It's so expensive. There's no way condos in New York are undervalued. Well, let me show you folks. The home value to rent ratio in New York City is now 18x, meaning that the typical condo of 1.1 million trades for about 18 times the annual rent it could fetch, which is expensive. However, that's the cheapest that condos have been in Manhattan in 2 decades. Additionally, if you look at the home value to income ratio in Manhattan, it is also trading at the cheapest level in 2 decades. So while Manhattan real estate is still expensive compared to other parts of America by a lot, it's actually the cheapest it's been compared to its history in 20 to 30 years, meaning that it's actually a good place to buy. And if you have capital, particularly if you're an investor who has cash, buying a studio or a 1-bedroom apartment in Manhattan is probably one of the best moves you can make in the US real estate market right now. Of course, there are still issues in Manhattan and New York City, particularly related to the subway. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the reports on the news. There's still a lot of subway crime. They're now putting the National Guard on the subways to lower the crime. They're having some issues with that. So there's still a bit of a hangover in New York City on certain things related to crime and homelessness that got really bad during the pandemic. Additionally, subway ridership on the MTA in Manhattan is still down about 25% from its pre-pandemic norms. So while some people have moved back to New York and some people are no longer working remote, there's still a large segment of the population, maybe who lives in New Jersey and Connecticut, that isn't commuting into the city like they used to in 2019 before the pandemic. And that means certain retail shops in New York are struggling. And it was kind of cool, folks. New York City has made some of these really big pedestrian ways here. So I'm on 9th Avenue right now, 9th Avenue and 34th Street. And like, look at this huge pedestrian alley where you can just kind of like walk around and chill and have a good time. It's an extension of the sidewalk, really pedestrian friendly. And interestingly, this is Peloton's headquarters right across the street. Some of you know Peloton makes those bikes that people have in their bedroom or their living room, and they train up for cycling, compete against other people. That's their headquarters. And this is another example of like the pandemic boom and bust. Peloton's stock price is down 75% from its pandemic peak. And that was a thing during the pandemic that like everyone did. In 2020 and 2020, it seemed like, oh man, you're locked inside. You can't go to the gym. Get a Peloton. Well, that's over. Peloton's really struggling financially. Their stock price is way down. We just keep seeing more and more of these instances as I travel across the US of the pandemic boom and the pandemic bust. And of course, I live in Florida, right? And we're seeing the pandemic bust play out in Florida full steam right now. Home prices are dropping, inventory is skyrocketing. One by one, all the entities and locations and businesses that boomed during the pandemic are now correcting. And I think that trend's going to continue into the future, which is going to be good news if you're someone watching this living in a state like Florida or Texas or Tennessee, because New York's bounce back and the rents going up in New York is actually going to be to the benefit of you in the South, because it's going to mean less demand for rentals there, less demand to buy homes there, and cheaper home prices in the Sun Belt, which is a trend we are definitely seeing. Prices are dropping all across the South and Mountain West right now, but they're going up in New York. Home prices in New York State are up over 6% over the last year. One of the best performances in the US. So I think it's time for a lot of us to update, our mental model. Hey, how's it going? Our mental model of how real estate's functioning in America going forward. No longer is the Sun Belt the place that's going to perform the best. Rather, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Illinois, the legacy markets with the big cities are going to do better in terms of real estate appreciation over the next 5 years, and that's a trend we're already seeing play out. However, as I said earlier, I'm actually a believer in New York City's real estate market. It's one of the few undervalued real estate markets in America right now. The home price to income ratio, the home price to rent ratio is well below the multi-decade norms, indicating you're more likely to see appreciation if you buy in Manhattan, if you buy in the Bronx, if you buy in Brooklyn, compared to other parts of America, especially compared to Texas and Florida, where the markets are very overvalued right now. So if you're a home buyer who's trying to maybe buy in New York or any other state across America, maybe Florida or Texas, I would encourage you, head to ReVenture app right now and look at our overvaluation metric for your city and zip code. This is a premium data point under home prices and affordability, and this overvaluation metric basically tells you if it's a good or bad time to buy. If prices are really overvalued on the overvaluation graph, it's telling you it's not such a good time to buy. If they're undervalued, it's saying it's a better time to buy. And you can see how this data has tracked throughout history. This is a very valuable data point for you if you're a prospective buyer or an investor in the housing market in 2025. So go to www.reventure.app right now, sign up for a premium plan, and access that overvaluation rate for your city and zip code.